Welcome. Today's case breaks the pattern of this series. It is not an accident. It is a study, Pechlivanis and Harris, 2025, and we are examining it as a worked example of research craft. The question behind it could hardly be more consequential: single pilot operations. But our focus is methodological. How do you build evidence you can actually trust on a question where careers, commercial interests, and safety all collide? The answer this study models is 3 methods, in deliberate sequence, each feeding the next. If the earlier cases in this series taught you how to analyze failure, this one teaches you how to produce knowledge. Let's lay out the architecture. The research question: what are the human factors hazards of single pilot operations, and what must any SiPO concept compensate for? Notice it is a 2-part question. Identify the hazards, then specify the compensations, and that shape drives the design. Component 1, archival analysis. 47 accidents and 237 incidents involving single-pilot jet operations. Each event coded using HFACS and threat and error management. Component 2, semi-structured interviews with 6 purposively selected safety experts, analyzed through reflexive thematic analysis into 5 themes. Component 3, a survey of 100-line pilots, quantifying perceived hazard severity and crew configuration preference. 3 components, 3 fundamentally different kinds of evidence: the record, the explanation, and the professional judgment of the community. Here is the methodological puzzle. Any single method can mislead. The archive gives you numbers, but numbers without meaning. It tells you that error-trapping failures recur in single-pilot events, not why. Interviews give you rich explanations, but stories without scale. 6 experts, however well chosen, cannot speak for a profession. A survey gives you breadth, but only on questions someone knew to ask. A big operational question: should transport aircraft fly with 1 pilot? Deserves more than 1 angle on the answer. So the study chained the 3 methods so that each answered precisely what the previous one could not, building a body of evidence that none of them could deliver alone. That chaining, not any individual component, is the intellectual contribution we are studying tonight. Component 1, the archival analysis, the patterns in the record. The 284 events were classified using 2 complementary taxonomies: HFACS for the layered human contributions and TEM for how threats and errors were or were not managed. Pause on the phrase coded, then counted, and on the reliability step. A second coder independently classified events, with agreement assessed using Cohen's kappa. That single procedural choice is what separates defensible archival research from one analyst's impressions. Teach it as non-negotiable. 3 dominant patterns emerged: missing error trapping, the absent second pilot who would have caught the slip, unchallenged mental models, no one to say, "Are you sure?" and workload saturation at exactly the phases where a second crew member would absorb tasks. Note what these 3 patterns have in common. Each is, structurally, the shadow of the missing second pilot. Component 2, expert interviews, the mechanisms behind the patterns. The archive established that error trapping fails. It could not establish why or what would compensate. 6 safety experts were purposively chosen, not a random sample, and deliberately so. In qualitative work, you sample for information richness, for the people best positioned to explain the phenomenon. Semi-structured interviews, guided by the archival findings, were analyzed using reflexive thematic analysis, Braun and Clark's approach, in which the researcher's interpretive engagement is treated as an instrument, disciplined and documented, rather than pretended away. 5 themes resulted, turning the archival counts into causal explanations. This is the pivot point of the design. Quantitative patterns in, qualitative mechanisms out, and both now shape what the survey must measure. Component 3, the pilot survey, the profession's judgment. 100-line pilots quantified 2 things: the perceived severity of the hazards the first 2 components had identified, and their preference among crew configurations. Consider what this adds. The archive spoke for the past. The experts spoke with depth, but from 6 voices. The survey reaches the scale neither could, the distributed operational judgment of the community that actually flies the aircraft. And because the instrument was built from the archival patterns and the interview themes, every survey item is anchored in evidence rather than in the researcher's assumptions. That is what integration means in mixed methods. Not 3 studies stapled together, but each stage constructed from the outputs of the last. The deeper mechanism has a name: explanatory sequential mixed methods design, executed with triangulation. Say the sequence aloud with me, because it is the template your own students should internalize. Quantitative patterns first. Qualitative explanation of those patterns, second. Quantitative confirmation at scale, third. Each stage feeds the next by design. And the second point on the slide deserves equal weight. Rigour is what makes it credible. Multi-source triangulation, inter-rater reliability with Cohen's kappa, purposive sampling with an explicit logic, documented integration steps. These are not decoration. They are precisely what separates this study from the weaker single-method predecessors in the SiPO literature, and they are why its findings can carry weight in a regulatory debate. 3 lessons that outlive the case. First, let the question pick the method. The design followed the anatomy of the research aim. What happened demanded the archive. Why demanded the interviews? How widely shared demanded the survey? Method loyalty is as much a vice in research as framework loyalty is in investigation. Second, triangulate to be trusted. When independent sources of evidence, records, experts, community converge on the same hazards, the finding acquires a strength no single method can claim. Convergence is the currency of credibility. Third, report the rigor. Kappa statistics, sampling logic, integration procedures, publish them. They are what allow others to judge, replicate, and ultimately believe the result. Evidence that cannot be audited is opinion with a bibliography. To close, this study anchors Chapter 14 of the book on research methods in aviation human factors, where it is presented as a complete worked example of explanatory sequential mixed methods, from question decomposition through design, analysis, integration, and reporting. It also, of course, feeds directly into the single pilot operations debate that runs through the later chapters. The full treatment is in Aviation Human Factors, Theory, Research, and Applications for Advanced Aviation Systems, HFACS and Pechlivanis, CRC Press, 2026. Thank you. And I would particularly welcome questions from those of you designing studies of your own.